Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love. Written by isthisselfcare. Narrated by S.E.P. Quick note, there is more French in this chapter, and again, I do not speak French, so bear with me. Chapter 8. The Party. Orphans or something. March drew to a chill, damp close, and with it came the day of the Delacroix fete. Draco was reminded of the occasion when his afternoon nap was interrupted by Henriette the house elf. As Draco yawned with delicious languor, Henriette began to quiz him on his evening attire. "This purple would be so becoming on you, monsieur," said Henriette, holding a rich robe aloft for Draco's inspection. "Like a Roman emperor, no?" "The black robes, please," said Draco. "This silver lining, perhaps, with your eyes, it would be so fetching." "The black, Henriette." Undeterred, Henriette produced the black robes, but also a set of constellation-spangled midnight blue ones. "Or perhaps?" she asked, holding the blue ones up higher. "Did my mother put you up to this?" asked Draco, eyeing the insistent elf. Henriette's large ears twitched backwards. "Madame suggested that you might be amenable to trying something else. Madame would also like you to not look as though you were attending a funeral." "I rather fancy looking like an undertaker. The black ones, leave them on the bed." "As you wish, monsieur," sighed Henriette, spreading the robes onto the bed. She curtsied and disapparated. Henriette was a well-spoken, well-trained French elf, but far pushier and more opinionated than the English elves that Draco had grown accustomed to in childhood. However, his mother loved her, and Draco had to admit that her cooking was a far sight better than the stodgy fare prepared by her UK brethren. Draco showered, perfected his hair, pulled on the hard-won black robes, perfected his hair again, and observed himself in the mirror to confirm that he was devastatingly good-looking. He was, which was excellent, because tonight Draco Malfoy was going out on the pole. It had been far too long since his last shag, some witch at Pansy's last birthday party, to his best recollection, and he had been failing the lack of action in the past weeks. It was time to rectify the situation. The Delacroix party would make for an excellent opportunity. There would be witches aplenty, perhaps Mademoiselle Rosalie Delacroix herself, if she was interested, mused Draco as he applied his cologne. Satisfied with his toilette, Draco descended to the flue parlor. "Henriette, did my mother leave yet?" he called as he threw the flue powder into the hearth. "Oui, elle est partie," said Henriette. "She left about 2 hours ago, monsieur. I believe she thought you'd be on your way shortly after." "Oops," thought Draco. "The Seneca," he said out loud, and he stepped into the flames. Draco dusted himself off on the Seneca's hearth, assisted by a pretentious-looking youth bearing a charmed feather duster. A moment later, he found himself accosted by Theodore Knott. "There's fashionably late, and then there's you," said Theo. "Bordering on rude, I think. It's 8:30, and you've missed the speeches." "Careless of me," said Draco, straightening out his robes. "Summarize." "Very pretty words about the true magic of gratitude, and also please give me money." "I can't believe I missed such a momentous address." The sniff interrupted them. "Ah, the usual blackguards." Zabini had spotted Draco and Theo as they made their way into the crowded rose room, where canapes were being circulated amongst a beautiful crowd. "Didn't know they let riffraff like you lot in here," said Zabini. His dress robes were impeccably tailored, possibly even more so than Draco's. He and Draco stared at each other hard, until Zabini's face split into a broad grin. "Good to see you two, the few, the brave, who aren't married and popping out sprogs." "Here to join you in the evening of debaucheries," said Theo with an elegant bow. "What are our plans tonight, gentlemen? Chaos and mayhem?" "Drinks, dancing, and finding a lovely lady to cuddle with," said Zabini, casting his gaze around the crowded room. "What he's having, but more fucking and less cuddling," said Draco, also observing the surrounding crowd. "Oh-ho," said Zabini. "Leave me the brunettes." "Fine," said Draco, thinking vaguely of Rosalie and her ilk. "I fancy something blonde, anyway." "Redheads for me, then." Theo relieved a waiter of 3 dirty martinis and passed them around. "Drink up. These'll put some hair on your chest. Barkeep is generous with the vodka." They drank, they bantered, they drifted in and out of groups of friends and old enemies. Draco learned by the by that the evening's event was in support of a new ward at St. Mungo's. Something about Delacroix Senior's life being saved had turned his mercenary mind to more philanthropic pursuits. So, not orphans. Whatever. The lights were dimmed, and in the center of the room, space was cleared for a dance floor. Draco found Rosalie and attempted conversation. But Rosalie was giggly and seemed rather attached to the arm of some French pureblood, or whose name Draco couldn't remember. He decided that she was a lost cause and continued his cruising. 2 or 3 other witches that Draco was acquainted with crossed paths with him, and he made his rounds. They were charming, eyelash-fluttering, and obviously willing, but he wasn't feeling the spark, or less romantically, the remotest twitch in his trousers. He divested himself of them one by one, distantly registering that, attractive and willing as they were, he found them clingy and bothersome more than anything else. Miss Luella Claiborne was particularly tenacious. Draco had to lie that his mother was summoning him to make his escape. What was wrong with him? Luella would have been willing to give him a quick gawk job behind a curtain, probably. But that wasn't what he wanted. Nor did he want to bring her home with him. Nor did he want to have her in one of the Seneca's luxurious rooms. So what did he want exactly? Not her, anyway. Not any of them. To make good on his lie, Draco joined his mother amongst a circle of St. Mungo's higher-ups. Narcissa looked pointedly at Rosalie's French companion and pressed her lips together in lieu of saying, "There, you see? All the good ones are snapped up, and you, my son, will die alone." Draco was fine with dying alone. At this precise moment, he simply wanted to find a witch who awakened something in him, to bed once or twice, and get some of his randiness out of his system. A slender thing in an open-back dress kept catching his eye as he made his way around the room. She was chatting with a mixed crowd of former Hufflepuffs and upper-echelon ministry employees, but her figure kept disappearing from view as the speakers mingled. The lights were so low that he could really only make out the curve of her back, the graceful movement of a hand holding a glass, the peak of a delicate ankle in a strappy shoe. "Oi," said Zabini, materializing at Draco's side. "I said leave me the brunettes." "My first choice found some French ponce," said Draco. "Spoken as though you yourself weren't a great ponce." Draco favored Zabini with a black look. "Anyway, sharing is caring." "Fine, you can soften her up for me. I shall look positively delicious after you've bollocksed your way through an introduction." Draco drained his glass and handed it to Zabini. "Watch me." He sauntered his way past the group, making a show of greeting a few acquaintances as he walked by, including a quick nod for Potter. Why was Potter here anyway? Something about orphans, probably. Ernie Macmillan, bless him, caught a wave and gestured Draco over in his ostentatious way. The chubby lad of Draco's Hogwarts days had grown into a stout man, broad-shouldered, who now headed the Department of International Magical Cooperation. "Macmillan," said Draco, shaking his hand. "How are you? Introduce me to your—" The lovely woman turned towards Draco as he spoke. It was bloody fucking Granger. Draco's shock was such that he almost heaved up his martini. But it was her. Her unruly hair was caught into an elegant chignon at the base of her neck. Her usual attire was replaced by a long green gown, probably Muggle in provenance, but nevertheless beautifully tailored. Her intense gaze was made even more so by the dark smudges of some cosmetic thing or other around her eyes. "What are you doing here?" asked Draco, freshly perturbed, because he had been imagining this woman's back and bum from all kinds of interesting angles for the past quarter hour, and it was fucking Granger. Literally fucking Granger. His question was rudely put. Macmillan stepped closer to Granger, which somehow annoyed Draco further, and said, "Hermione was personally invited by the Monsieur Delacroix, along with all of the healers who helped him. Didn't you hear the speech?" "Ah," said Draco, feeling stupid. Granger raised one eyebrow in inquiry. "I wouldn't have expected you here either. I didn't think healthcare aligned with your interests." Macmillan, who appeared to have taken on the role of mediator between them, now stepped closer to Draco. "I understand that the Malfoys are making a rather substantial contribution to the ward," he slapped Draco's shoulder officially. "Good sorts after all, these Malfoys, aren't they?" Granger gave Macmillan one of her fixed smiles. Meanwhile, Draco was nodding as though he was perfectly aware of this large contribution, which, come to think of it, his mother might have mentioned 2 or 3 times, if only he'd been paying attention. "Of course," continued Macmillan, "we haven't pieced together the identity of the anonymous contributor who was going to be matching the evening's proceeds galleon for galleon. My money's on one of those old French blokes in Delacroix's entourage. Lemaître owns half the vineyards in Burgundy." Macmillan interrupted himself at the sight of a tall wizard passing their group. "Ah, I've spotted Finbook. Please excuse me. I've got to harass him about some new legislation he's pushing. Perhaps if I get him more to drink." This left Draco and Granger alone, off to edge the large circle. Granger was still observing Draco with a raised brow, which made him realize that he was gaping at her like a cretin. However, there was no way to say, "Sorry, it's just that I've been fantasizing about taking you from behind for the past quarter hour. without sounding like an even bigger cretin. To cover this botheration, Draco said crossly, "You are meant to inform me when you're attending public events. Now I can't even enjoy myself. I have to mind you." It was Granger's turn to get testy. "Mind me? Who is going to attack me? My colleagues? The family of the man I helped pull back from the brink of death? Delacroix brought in the best security money can buy, or did you not notice the other oars? Have you done anything other than look at bums since you arrived? And I did inform you that I was attending 2 weeks ago." There were rather a lot of accusations being leveled at him in this tirade. Draco selectively addressed a few. "I came to look at bums, but that's the only reason I'm here. And the bum selection is paltry, just so you know, barring a few... anyway, it's been a monumental waste of time. And you most certainly did not tell me you'd be attending. I would have remembered, because I would have been annoyed, because minding you interferes with looking at bums." Granger crossed her arms. "I most certainly did tell you. Check your jotter." Draco pulled out his jotter under the withering glare, a seed of doubt now in his mind. He was a little slow about doing it. Granger made an impatient sound and leaned in closer to him to turn the pages herself. Draco noted that she smelled good, again. Light whiffs of something sweet and airy tonight. They flipped through a few pages of Granger's communications until... "Ah," said Draco. As it happens, Granger had indeed told him 2 weeks ago, shortly after he had stunned the jotter into silence. The jotter closed with a snap. Granger looked indignant, though she was attempting to keep her body language neutral to not cause a scene. "See? How dare you scold me like a wayward child?" she hissed in a fierce temper. "I meant to be here. I'm a guest of honor." Some angel or other rescued Draco by calling Granger over to meet a cohort of French healers. She left, but not without a dark backwards glance at Draco that promised that this wasn't over. Draco made a strategic retreat to Zabini and Theo with something less than his usual swagger in his stride. Zabini chewed delicately on a quail brochette. "That looked like it went well." "Fuck off," said Draco. "Poor old boy needs more drink in him," said Theo, gesturing over a waiter to refresh their libations. "Have this, Draco, and stop staring at Granger like a slack-jawed idiot. I don't fancy Potter coming over here to defend her honor." "I didn't realize it was fucking Granger," said Draco, feeling utterly wrong-footed by the entire affair. "Neither did I," said Zabini. "She's grown up into something rather nice, hasn't she?" "I work with her," said Draco. He took a fortifying swig of whatever throat-burning substance Leo had provided. "Do you?" Leo looked intrigued. "What have Aurors got to do with healers?" "Top secret, so you can fuck off too," said Draco. "Interesting," said Zabini, studying Draco a little too closely for comfort. He turned his attention back to Granger, who was now deep in conversation with the French healers. "Why isn't she taking and popping out kidlets yet? Wasn't she engaged to the youngest weasel?" "I think so," said Theo, "but let us remember that Granger was snogging international Quidditch players at age 14. Menfolk might have peaked early for her." "It's all downhill after Crumb and his broomstick," snickered Zabini. "The rest of us oiks haven't a fucking ice cube's chance in hell." "I like a challenge," said Zabini, "and I do like brunettes. Brunettes with brains are another thing entirely." Draco had fallen silent for the duration of the conversation. The subject matter was irritating him profoundly, though he didn't know why. He had heard, and participated in, 1,000 versions of this banter himself previously, but tonight... Narcissa called Draco over to introduce him to some of the Delacroix family's particular friends. A friendly patriarch, his elegant wife, and their 2 pretty daughters, aged 26 and 28 respectively. Draco was aware, as he spoke to the women, that he could please his mother by showing an interest in one of the daughters, and also please himself by fulfilling his aim of finding a witch to bring to bed. However, he found himself uninterested by their conversation, and distracted by the crowd around him, where he occasionally saw a glimpse of a dark green gown. He told himself that, now that he knew Granger was here, he was once again seeing her as his principal and therefore keeping an eye on her. Draco was asked if he'd like to dance, and he said yes absently, finding himself on the dance floor with the youngest of the 2 witches, still distracted. Granger was dancing with Potter. "I didn't know you were the strong silent type," giggled the woman in Draco's arms. What was her name again? Amandine? He'd go with Amandine. Said Draco, still watching Potter and Granger. "Is that Harry Potter?" asked Amandine, following his line of sight. "I've heard a bit about him, I think." "Only a bit," asked Draco. Bless the French and their utter disinterest in English affairs. "I think he was involved in your last war, no? A hero." "Yeah, something like that." "And the woman too?" "Yes," said Draco. They are rather beautiful together, said Amandine, watching Potter laugh at something Granger said. You can see the connection. He's married, cut in Draco. They aren't together. Ah, well, friendship is an equally strong bond. Draco let the Amandine prattle on about her opinions on the bonds of love and friendship. The song was drawing to its end. If he was going to gauge her interest in any nighttime activities, the time was now. He could slide a hand down towards her backside, dip his face into her neck, and ask her what her plans were after the party. The steps were clear, and the witch, from the way she was pressing himself to him, was interested. However, Draco found that he had no interest in doing so. The song ended and a slower number began. Draco relinquished his grasp on Amandine's waist. He walked her back to her parents with some polite commentary about the evening and how lovely it had been to meet them all. He ambled towards the bar where Theo and some former Slytherins and Ravenclaws had set up camp. Zabini's gone, said Theo as Draco neared. Took the older sister with him. Said he'd leave you the less experienced one, but it doesn't look like that panned out for you either. Losing your touch, mate. No spark, said Draco with a shrug. There's always Granger, said Theo. She looks like she's ready to set you on fire. Sparks aplenty. Draco stole a glance towards where Granger stood amongst the other healers. It was true that her looks in his direction were a fiery variety. I suppose you don't want to die tonight, said Theo. He made room for Draco at the bar. She's off limits in about 100 different ways, even if I did have an inclination towards masochism. How does she get on with your mother? Asked Theo. No reason. Draco's eyes widened. He looked over his shoulder. Theo chortled. They watched as Narcissa Malfoy's small group drifted towards the French healers that Granger had been speaking with. Draco wasn't certain that his mother and Granger had ever addressed each other in person since the trials 15 years ago. Those had been a tense affair, but Granger's testimony had been of tremendous assistance in clearing up Narcissa Malfoy's name. Granger had been terribly honest in her accounting of the time and the manner, but had made it clear that Narcissa Malfoy had been an unwilling, powerless onlooker, and that her later actions had ultimately saved Harry Potter's life. Granger had, however, been less generous in her testimony on Lucius Malfoy's wartime acts, and her depositions on that front had added to the substantial pile of evidence that had resulted in the elder Malfoy's Azkaban sentence. Draco wasn't certain where Granger fell on his mother's list of people to blame for Lucius's eventually decline and death in Azkaban, nor did he know how that weighed against Narcissa's own freedom, as well as Draco's, in which Granger had also played a part. Draco was too far away to make out much of what was being said between the two groups. He saw Granger's back straighten as Narcissa approached, but her expression remained neutral. Likewise, his mother's shoulders were set, but her usual polite smile was firmly in place. They shook each other's fingertips and quickly turned to converse with others. Psh, said Theo, swirled the ice clubs in his glass. I was hoping for something more interesting. Haven't you got a redhead to chase? Asked Draco, making a shooing motion. I do, said Theo, but first, liquid courage. She's one of the French delegation, and most certainly too good for me. Theo jutted his chin towards Granger's group of healers. Narcissa had moved on, and a lovely red-haired witch was now beside Granger. I'm not even sure she speaks English, said Theo. Try, voulez-vous coucher avec moi, said Draco. Theo repeated the phrase with great sincerity, though his accent was appalling. Bit forward, I think, but maybe I will. I'll blame you when it all goes awry. I'll say you told me it meant something about pretty hair. Do not speak my name in front of Granger. I'd rather she forget that I exist. Too late, said Theo, pushing away from the bar. I like this plan. It makes me look like a sweet innocent, and you a dickhead. Draco reached out to stop him, but Theo's sleeve slipped through his fingers. Which is the natural state of things anyway, said Theo with a smirk over his shoulder. Draco debated the ethics of a quick tongue-tying jinx to the back of Theo's head as he neared his redhead target. The problem with morals was that they made you waste time. Theo was at the red-haired witch's side now, having somehow procured 2 glasses of wine, one of which he offered to her, and the other to Granger, who declined, as she was still nursing her champagne. Theo said something that made the 2 healers laugh. He looked theatrically distressed. Then he turned around and pointed at Draco with an exaggerated gesture. The red-haired witch shook her head at him. Granger looked unimpressed. Draco rather felt that he had to defend his good name. He snatched up his own drink and stalked over. Do not believe a word out of this man's mouth, he said as he neared them. Draco assured me that it meant that I was admiring your lovely hair, said Theo, his hand on his chest. I would never say something so ungentlemanly, mademoiselle. The red-haired witch looked amused. Meanwhile, Granger was regarding Theo with a healthy dose of skepticism. At least she could see through the charade. How do I say, "Do you want to dance?" asked Theo. "Voulez-vous danser avec moi?" said Draco and Granger simultaneously. "What they said Theo. The red-haired witch regarded Theo for a long time. Finally she said, "D'accord." Theo gallantly held out his arm, and said something pretty about strangers in a strange land, and swept his new companion towards the dance floor. "Suave fuck," muttered Draco. "Unctuous, rather," sniffed Granger. "I can't believe that worked on Solange." "Perhaps Solange wants some English beef for a change," said Draco. "I shall ask her to review of the quality of the beef in the morning," said Granger with a cynical look at Theo's retreating back. "You must tell me if it's mediocre," said Draco. "Why?" asked Granger. "Ammunition. You are terrible friends to each other." Granger studied Draco over her glass. Then she seemed to recollect herself. "I'm still angry with you. Go away." "Fine," said Draco. There were a dozen witches in the room who enjoyed his company. He didn't see why he'd waste his time with the one who despised it. However, before he could plunge back into the crowd, Granger asked, in French, "Since when do you speak French?" The question was posed in an irritated kind of way, as though he owed her an explanation on that front. "Since when do you speak French?" replied Draco, also in French, because if anyone owed anyone an explanation, it was her. "I have family in Haute-Savoie," said Granger. "The Malfoys are in from the lower region." Granger sipped in at her champagne, regarding him with narrowed eyes. "What?" asked Draco. "It explains so much," said Granger, switching back to English. "So much what?" "Just," here Granger made a gesture towards Draco's general being, "everything." Draco wasn't certain of what she was implying, but he felt that it was less than complimentary. "Haute-Savoie explains a lot about you." "What's that supposed to mean?" said Granger, bristling immediately. Draco gestured towards Granger, as though she were composed entirely of raclette and too much vermouth. Granger put a hand on her hip. "Do you own a chateau?" "Yes," said Draco. "So there," said Granger triumphantly, because obviously that explained everything. "Psh! You probably do that muggle thing. The thing on those two long-footed paddles." Granger regarded Draco with an artificial blankness of expression. "Stop playing stupid. It doesn't suit you." "But I haven't any idea what you're talking about," said Granger. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." "Seeing? Sicking?" Granger did her best to look uncomprehending. It was not an expression that she was used to. She did it terribly. "Skiing!" said Draco, pointing sharply at Granger's face. Granger occupied herself with her drink. "I knew it," said Draco. He opened his mouth to cast further aspersions on her character in the form of queries about her get in the Alps, but a limp hand caressed his forearm for attention. It was one of the eyelash-fluttering pure-blood witches from earlier, Luella. "Draco, you've hardly danced at all." This was very much an invitation, and as a well-mannered wizard, Draco's response should have been to ask Luella to dance. However, the very feel of Luella's languid hand on his sleeve was aggravating, as was the moon-eyed look in her eyes. He simply didn't want to. Draco's delay in responding was noted by Luella, who peeked around his shoulder to see Granger. Granger studied Luella with one of her analytical looks. "Oh," said Luella with a polite gasp at the sight of Granger. "Unless you are already—" "No," said Granger at the same time as Draco said, "Yes, we were just about to." No, said Granger, backing away. "You two dance. Please enjoy yourselves." "Oh, but I couldn't take your partner away from you," said Luella with a colorless smile. "I am so sorry to have interrupted. So silly of me. I hadn't seen you." "But—" Luella cut off Granger's protest with a wave and minced away in the direction of the bar. "What are you doing?" hissed Granger as Draco took her arm and placed it over his. He plucked her half-finished glass of champagne and dropped it on a floating tray. "You owe me," said Draco. "Or did you forget me saving you from Dr. Whatsit?" "If I'd known this would be the payment, I would have taken the drink with Dr. Whatsit." Draco steered Granger toward the dance floor. "One dance to keep me out of her clutches." "Your mother is here," said Granger, looking about in obvious unease. "And?" "I meant to do goodwill stuff, building bridges and all that rubbish." "But we're not even on speaking terms normally. Does she even know you're working with me?" "No, and you're working with me," corrected Draco. "You were assigned to me." "Exactly." Granger made a sound of irritation, as though Draco was the most frustrating creature in the entire world. She was wrong, however. That title went to her. "Harry is here," was her next objection as the dance floor came into view. "Brilliant. I'll tell Potter I wanted to keep a closer eye on you. Someone was acting suspicious. Who? Asked Granger, because evidently she had to interrogate Draco on every aspect of this fabricated plan. Theo, said Draco without hesitation. Theo was currently snogging the red-haired witch a few meters away. Granger observed this fact, then asked what exactly Knott was doing that was so suspicious. That's a diversion tactic, said Draco. Don't underestimate him. The only thing I underestimated was Solange's fondness for Lincolnshire sausage, said Granger, watching Solange grope at Theo's crotch. Will you stop gulping and dance? Asked Draco. He slid his hand to her waist and gave her a squeeze, which served to remind her that her hands should be at his shoulders. With evident reluctance, she placed them there. Put some sincerity into it, Granger, growled Draco under his breath. I pretended to be a pilot for you for 6 hours in that pub. This is one bloody dance. You enjoyed pretending to be a pilot, whispered Granger. I am not enjoying pretending to be whatever I'm pretending to be for your friend and whatever game it is you're playing with her. To her credit, she did attempt to lessen the obvious tension in her stance, but Draco could feel the lingering rigidity in her hips. Can't you relax? No, I'm dancing with Draco Malfoy, snarled Granger. There is nothing relaxing about this. Draco permitted himself a large, dramatic sigh. Also, it's not a game. Make it look real. If my mother suspects that I turned down a dance with a very eligible witch for a fictive dance with you, I shan't hear the end of it. Granger maneuvered him toward the wall at the back of the dance floor, using other couples to screen them from view. Why did you turn her down? She asked. She seemed your type. Well, that was presumptuous. What's my type, Granger? Wealthy, I assume. Pureblood, I also assume. Blonde, stunningly beautiful. Probably owns a few chateaux in the Loire Valley. It irritated Draco that this list was more or less correct. She had neglected certain other womanly attributes to keep an eye out for, but then she was rarely vulgar. Seeing that Draco hadn't responded to her, Granger gave him an inquisitive look. Am I wrong? Aren't you going to tell me that I'm making a terrible assumption? No. Then why? None of your bloody business, said Draco, because he owed her no explanation whatsoever, and also because he couldn't quite put it into words himself. Said Granger. Once again, Draco found himself the subject of one of her looks, of assessment, the same look she gave particularly intriguing problems. Stop looking at me like I'm a math problem, said Draco. To Draco's surprise, this earned him a smile from Granger. It brightened her eyes and dimpled her left cheek. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Draco blinked. It felt like a flash of the sun. Malfoy's paradox, said Granger, more to herself than him. I beg your pardon? Nothing. The witch in his arms grew quiet and thoughtful. Though she was there, the silk at her waist was warm under his hands. Her wrists were a small pressure on his shoulders. She was also not there. Her eyes had grown distant. Granger was thinking. About him. That was alarming. There was at least one happy side effect, which was that, with her mind occupied elsewhere, Granger's body relaxed into him a little more, and he felt less like he was holding up a plank and more like he was dancing with a woman. Which was alarming in its own way, as this witch was more pleasing under his hands than any witch that evening had been, and the occasional soupçon of her scent that drifted his way when they moved was more delicious than the potent perfumery that accompanied Luella and her ilk, which was all well and good, but this was Granger, for fuck's sake. Draco straightened his arms out so that Granger was literally an arm's length. She came back to herself with a frown, as though dealing with some disturbing thought. Hi, said Potter's voice, making both Draco and Granger jump. A moment later, Potter's disheveled head was between the two of them. Excuse me, but what the hell is going on here? Draco did not permit Granger time to answer. Fuck off and let me do my job, Potter. Never one to fuck off on demand, Potter persisted. Why are you keeping her so close? Did you see something? It's not, began Granger. Exactly, it's not, said Draco, jutting his chin towards Theo, acting suspicious, sniffing around. Potter turned to observe the wizard in question, whose face was somewhere in the red-headed witch's neck. He frowned. I'll take care of him. Harry, it's not, said Granger with fresh frustration. It's not. Yes, interrupted Draco with benevolence. I'm on it, Hermione, said Potter, retreating to take up what he no doubt considered an inconspicuous position near Theo. Granger's grasp on Draco's shoulders now shifted towards his neck and suggested thoughts of strangulation. You are the worst, she said in an exasperated whisper. Be quiet, I want to watch this, said Draco, angling them so they could both see Potter. Why not? Asked Granger. Why not indeed? I am going to murder you. All right, said Draco, but first let me enjoy my revenge. In the next 5 minutes, Draco was treated to the highly enjoyable sight of Potter glaring at Theo, accidentally bumping into him, spilling his drink on him, and generally being a hostile presence within 2 feet of the man, no matter where he moved. Potter could cut a rather intimidating figure when he wanted to, bolstered by the legends of his feats as a war hero and as an Auror, and Theo soon began to notice his observer and break a sweat about it. Eventually, Theo relinquished his grasp on Solange and made some excuse to her. Then he tottered drunkenly towards Draco and asked Draco to be honest, as he'd had a lot to drink. But was he actually snogging a French redhead, or was it Potter's wife, the Weasley girl, that he'd been getting off with by accident? And was Potter the type to curse a man when his back was turned, or would he be able to leave the party unscathed? Draco magnanimously pointed Theo to the exit and said that he would take care of protecting him from the wrathful Potter. Not to worry, old chap. You are dreadful, said Granger's comment, when all was done and Theo had left, witchless and nursing blue balls. Draco said, "Job well done," to Potter, who gave Draco a thumbs up and disappeared into the crowd. "I love Potter," sighed Draco. "You rile him up and point him in a direction, and I do hope you'll find me less easy to manipulate," said Granger. Draco preferred not to answer that precise question. He moved her hips in one direction, and then the other. "Not too bad," he said. "A bit stiff. Perhaps we need to get another champagne in you." "I meant metaphorically, as you very well know," said Granger, growing even more rigid under Draco's hands. "I don't think you're quite as gung-ho as Potter," said Draco. More was the pity. "But still overzealous." "High-strung," suggested Draco. "I am not high-strung," said Granger in a very high-strung voice. After a pause, she amended the statement with, "You make me high-strung. You are infuriating." "Load of tosh," said Draco. "I am charming and debonair. Magnetic. I can't even walk across a room without witches falling into my lap." "It's true. Have a look about." Granger glanced around and found that it was indeed true, as Amandine, Rosalie, Luella, and some of the other evening's witches who were dancing nearby were casting longing glances towards Draco. "Do they want your name, your money, or your inexpressible pleasure of your company?" asked Granger. "All three. I am a triple threat." "You certainly are," said Granger. Before Draco could be flattered, however, she counted to 3 on her fingers. Tension headaches, heart palpitations, and general chaos. Draco scoffed. "If you didn't traipse about with offal in your pockets to deal with hags, I wouldn't have to be such an imposition. You give me tension headaches. Why can't your gallivanting take you to safe little teas and meetings about orphans?" Now it was Granger's turn to scoff. "Safe little teas? You fled your mother's last tea, or have you forgotten?" "I haven't," grimaced Draco. "From one coven of hags directly into another." Granger looked pensive. "However, if my next bit of gallivanting involves tea and ladies, it would guarantee your absence, and I can avoid you altogether." "When is it?" "Beltane," said Granger. "Where?" "Malfoy Manor, the tea parlor." "There isn't a tea parlor at the manor." "No?" "No." Granger waved her hand. "Wherever the ladies gather in the greatest numbers with the most orphans. Do you think I should patent this?" "Patent what?" "My recipe for Malfoy repellent. I think there would be a market for it." "That market would consist entirely of you. I rather think there's a greater demand for Malfoy attractant, but good luck identifying the formula." Granger cast furtive glances towards the miscellany of witches looking longingly at Draco. You could be right. I'm always right." "Bums," said Granger. "Beg your pardon? For the attractant formula." Yes," said Draco. "Bums and not inviting you, 2 key components to ensure that you'll pop by. And removing tracking devices, and telling you to go away. You are a contrarian of the highest order. I still want to know how you tracked me at Uffington without the ring, by the by." "Dowsing rods." It amused Draco that Granger did not immediately dismiss the possibility, however. After a moment of reflection, she said, "Liar." "Tell me about Beltane," said Draco. "You are very, extremely, intensely invited to come. I would give worlds for you to be there. Nothing would make me happier," said Granger, exercising this new reverse psychology theory. "Excellent," said Draco. "I will be removing my ring to ensure your presence." Here Draco stilled, but Granger's eyes sparkled in mirth. "You think you're funny," said Draco. "If you break that one-way spell work again, I shall be cross, and I shan't fix it." Granger gave him a querying look. "You say that as though it's a terrible threat." "It is." "How? Do you really want to feel every permutation of my heart rate through that ring?" asked Draco. You've got it calibrated so you only feel dangerous extremes, I thought. Do you know how to calibrate it on your end? No. Exactly. You don't want to feel my every exertion and wonder what the fuck I'm doing. Or who. Ugh, said Granger, shrinking away. Noted. The song had been more or less dancing to faded into silence. The magically amplified voice of Augustine Delacroix echoed towards them from somewhere in the middle of the room, thanking all for their attendance. What did you cure the bloke of anyway? Asked Draco. Healer-patient confidentiality, tutted Granger. I can't tell you. Draco, who had posed the question out of idle curiosity, was intrigued to find that Granger's eyes had lost their sparkle. She was occluding again. Delacroix continued his speech. He indicated, to raucous applause, that between his family's own philanthropic contributions and the evening's proceeds, they had doubled their original objective. The Delacroix ward was going to become a reality. Hundreds of champagne glasses materialized at head height for the guests to pluck out of the air, and raise amongst cries of cheers and santé. Since Granger was conveniently beside him, Draco touched his glass to hers. A group of healers swallowed Draco and Granger, and there was much clapping and clinking of glasses. Granger exclaimed, with other overexcited St. Mungo's healers, how wonderful this was, how brilliant the new ward was going to be, how many lives this would change for the better, and so on and so forth. Draco quietly faded out of the group, leaving Granger and her colleagues to her celebration. His last sight of Granger was her smiling as she clasped hands with another healer and spun about. She was bright-eyed, joyous, and lovely under the soft lights.